Well, welcome back everyone from the break. I'm very excited to introduce our next speaker, Sister Mary Christa Nutt, RSM. She is a member of the Religious Sisters of Mercy of Alma, Michigan. She is currently serving as her community's local superior in Alma. She also serves on the General Council of the Institute and as the Director of Intellectual Formation. Finally, she teaches Thomistic philosophy and theology to the postulants and novices. Sister earned a baccalaureate, a license of sacred theology, and a doctoral degree in moral theology at the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas in Rome. She is presently working on publishing her first book on freedom and religious obedience. Welcome, Sister Dr. Mary.
Hello, I'm glad to be with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm gonna step aside and let you take on your topic.
Okay, thank you. So as we just heard, my name is Sister Mary Christa Nutt, and I'm a Sister of Mercy from Alma, Michigan, and our sisters serve in the Diocese of Toledo. I'm very pleased for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm very grateful for the invitation. So today I am briefly presenting on patience, according to Father Basil Moreau, and I'll also touch a little bit on some of the documents of the Church and St. Thomas Aquinas. So I hope you don't mind me touching a little with St. Thomas, because he's my background is in Thomistic morals. So when St. Thomas Aquinas speaks of patience, he quotes St. Augustine. He starts us off by quoting St. Augustine to say that the virtue of the soul that is called patient is a great gift from God. And we even preach the patience of God himself, who bestows the virtue on us. So that's kind of a dense sentence. But what he's saying is that to be truly patient is to be like God. And the person who is patient has a kind of a divine quality, because God is patient with us, and he's the model and author of all patience. So this is, in many ways, a very special and blessed virtue if we can strive to possess it. The virtue of patience belongs to fortitude, which might be obvious to some, to others might be more surprising. Now, fortitude is a virtue that governs the irascible appetite. So the first key word in talking about patience is that it governs. So when I use the word patience as a virtue that governs, what I mean is that it does not squelch or deaden the irascible appetite, but it governs it. And the same is true of patience. So when we say that we act with patience, we're not lessening or deadening our desires, but we're governing them. This is an important note about what we aim for when we aim to exercise the virtue of patience. Now, I mentioned the irascible appetite. The irascible appetite is that appetite inside us that rises to a challenge when there is a difficult good to obtain. So we could say that it's the passion that roughly approximates to fight or flight instinct in us. And so fortitude is the virtue that governs the fight or flight instinct in us. So this means that while some virtues like temperance allow us to be guided by reason instead of our pleasures, for example, fortitude helps us when we feel disinclined to do a good thing because it's difficult. So fortitude is a virtue that allows us to meet with obstacles with steady courage when we are seeking to do the right thing according to faith and reason. So it's the governance, you could say, fortitude is the governance of our fight or flight instinct according to faith and reason. And patience falls into this category. So we could say that patience is a kind of a fortitude of the mind. It's a steadiness that does not waver in the face of weaknesses, struggles, trials, and sorrows that we encounter when we're seeking to do the good. And I'll repeat this one more time. So patience is a kind of a fortitude of the mind in the face of difficulties, sorrows, and trials that we encounter when we're seeking the good. So if we're trying to understand what patience is so that we can become more patient, one of the questions we might immediately ask is, what is the good we are seeking? So if patience is oriented to the good we're seeking, what is the good we're seeking in Catholic education? Now, I'm sure you've all read this before, but I'm just going to repeat it. The words of Father Moreau, so beautifully outlined in his message to Catholic educators, when he says, Catholic education is the art of helping young people to completeness. For the Christian, this means that education is helping a young person to be more like Christ. From the word's roots, education, we can interpret it to mean leading a young person away from ignorance and disorder. And in this way, it consists precisely in reforming the human nature, which has been weakened by original sin. This reforming involves restoring to rational processes the light that existed before the fall of our first parents, and then restoring to the heart the kinds of feelings and sentiments that ought to be there. And likewise, in addition to Father Moreau, the Church, in her document on education, Gravissimum Educationis, in a quote again I'm sure we've all heard many times, tells us again about what the good we're seeking in pursuing Catholic education actually is. And it says this: since all Christians have become by rebirth of water and the Holy Spirit a new creature, so that they should be called the children of God, they have a right to Christian education. A Christian education does not merely strive for the maturing of a human person, as just now described, but has it as its principle and goal that the baptized, while they are gradually introduced to the knowledge of the mystery of salvation, become ever more aware of the gift of faith that they have received. And that in addition, they learn how to worship God the Father in spirit and truth, and be conformed in their personal lives according to the new man, created in justice and holiness of truth, so that they may develop into perfect manhood to the full measure of Christ and strive for the growth of the mystical body, the Church. So again, we can see both according to the Church and according to Father Moreau, we have a very lofty goal to reach in Christian education. And then the same document from the Church, Gravissimum Educationis, goes on to say this, and this is directed to ourselves, to Catholic educators. It says about Catholic schools, beautiful indeed, and of great importance is the vocation of all those who aid parents in fulfilling their duties, and who as representatives of the human community undertake the task of education in schools. And that means all of us at this conference. And then the document goes on to say, this vocation, the vocation to Catholic education, demands special qualities from us, the educator, of mind and heart, very careful preparation, and continuing readiness to renew and to adapt. So we've just heard a lot from Father Moreau and from the Church, which is both challenging and encouraging about the good we seek when we engage in Catholic education. So we can say that in choosing this lofty end to fulfill the task of Catholic education, we also know that the task is difficult at times, and the end is hard to obtain. So we know that education, Catholic education, to be called a Catholic educator is a special call, but that it can cost us, the educators, or an administrator of education, a great deal at times. Thus, we know it is inevitable that our passions of sorrow or frustration or suffering or trials are going to arise when we strive to educate the next generation. And our task is not only to educate them according to whatever the cultural or intellectual traditions we're passing on to them are, but very much also that we help them and inculcate in them to become Christ-like. We know that to achieve our goals better, we have to govern the passions in ourselves that arise when we meet with the obstacles of seeking the good of educating our children and young adults. Now, seeing patience as a virtue that governs our responses to sufferings and the difficulties that we encounter while educating youth helps us to understand something else about patience. And also it helps us to understand what patience is not. So in other words, we can say based on the goal we're seeking and how patience relates to that goal, what some false ideas about patience might actually be. So if patience is ordered to seeking the excellence of mind and soul of our students so that they may grow to be members of the mystical body, that is of the church and of Christ, growing to full maturity, we know that it is not complacency with mediocrity. So there can be a temptation to think that patience is overlooking serious faults. It is not undue leniency when a youngster falls short of the good that we want for him or her. It is not permissiveness in the face of evils of any kind. So if a child or a young adult is doing something that hurts his mind or his soul, or the mind or the soul of others, patience rises to the challenge of persevering in helping the child. It does not shrink back, because remember, it's related to fortitude. So patience is a rising to the challenge with fortitude of mind, guided by steady, forward-moving reason. Patience pushes on toward the good we are seeking as Catholic educators with evenness or peacefulness of mind. This also does not mean that the patient person is never angry. So that's another perhaps false way of looking at patience, that it means we are never angry. So another key word when we looked at the definition of the virtue of patience is that it is not a disposition of our soul that deadens what can sometimes be a strong passion. In fact, St. Thomas Aquinas thinks that fortitude and patience can be helped at times by moderate anger. So I'm not advocating losing control or indulging any kind of rage, but that a moderate anger at times corrects the wrong with the aim of seeking something better for the student. So patience is not the failure to correct, but it is correcting at times with a strength of mind. And we have many simple daily examples of exercising patience and persevering in the hard work that's required for Catholic education. Even simply planning lessons step by step in order to impart the valuable knowledge that we have been trained to give to young persons is an exercise in patience. Patience can be explaining and re-explaining in creative ways concepts and values to young persons that they need in order to face a culture that is sometimes hostile to true human goods or to the Catholic faith. Patience does not seek only to make our students feel good about themselves, but it perseveres with steadiness, charity, and hope in helping young people to become good students and especially good persons. So Father Moreau also tells us that the patient teacher or administrator does not then seek good feelings about themselves or about their students, and at times they may even have to sacrifice personal popularity in order to seek the good of the students. So patience is also related closely not only to fortitude, but to long suffering. So our goals in education cannot be reached quickly. Such lofty goals, goals that even exceed our own capabilities at time, because how can we create a Christ-like attitude in a student? We have to cooperate with Christ's grace and his help in order to do this. And this is not a goal that we can reach quickly. So the intellectual and moral development of another human being, a young person, who's mysteriously endowed with free choice as we are, is not a matter of short-term results. It requires a long view of the end. Just the time required to educate each soul can be a matter of suffering and trial at times. So just how long it can take to see change or improvement at times in a young person, correcting, teaching, and repeating over and over, can require patience. And patience is not a burst of energy or strength in one moment, but it's constancy, steady, reasoned, faith-filled constancy at the task. Finally, I'll close this little talk by showing that for St. Thomas Aquinas, for the Church, and for Father Moreau, patience is deeply aligned with grace and charity. So in order to exercise the real virtue of patience, it requires the love of God and love of those we serve in education, both the students we serve and by extension their parents alike. In fact, St. Thomas even asks, the virtue of patience without grace. And his answer is that the virtue of patience is caused by charity. And he quotes St. Augustine to say, the strength of desire helps a man to bear toil and pain. For no one willingly undertakes what is painful, save for the sake of what brings true happiness. In other words, we would never choose the sufferings that Catholic education sometimes requires of us for the sake of suffering in itself. We undertake this special toil, which is Catholic education, because of something we love. Hence, St. Augustine says, the good for the sake of which one is willing to endure evil is more desired and loved than the good, the privation of which causes the sorrow that we bear patiently. So what he's saying is that we give up and we make certain sacrifices of our time, of our passions, for things that we love more than what we sacrificed. When education is motivated by love of the good for our children, by love of Christ, those that we educate, when we do it out of love for God, we will have the fortitude to bear each difficulty we face with patience. So what I've presented is a lofty virtue, a virtue that requires daily long suffering, and yet a virtue imbued deeply with love, a virtue that only truly exists because of love. So I hope that this will inspire us a little bit as Catholic educators to keep going day in and day out with patience in all the hardships that we endure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sister. Bravo. What a wonderful talk on such an important virtue to all of our lives in general. But yeah, I think probably to the teaching profession, vocation in particular, such a crucial, practical virtue. So thank you so much for that presentation. God bless.
You too. Thank you very much.
Well, once again, we're going to take another 10-minute break, everyone. But take some time to make some notes or to discuss if you're watching with a group. I have a feeling that this talk on this virtue of patience is one that will yield a lot of reflection, a lot of things to pray through and talk through and think through, because we all wrestle with it. But again, as Sister pointed out, patience is not, as we might have previously thought, I know I thought, was just this holding everything in and dealing with what's out there, rather than it's this governance of our passions that allows us to remain steady and steadfast in the midst of difficult tasks to see that the good is done. So again, wonderful stuff. Let's take that break. We'll see you again in 10 minutes.